Okay, let's just go over the lactate test first and then spend a bit more time on the FaCt one. Just first off, if I just jump over to the spreadsheet here, we had an error, 155. Yeah, so error at 200 watts here. So 200 watts, 144. So this 2.6 here is like a manual entry on my part. It's tricky. This often happens. So this test looks really quite clean, except for the possible, LT1 here. So we can't really define it. We can't define it without that number. We have a good clear deflection of LT2 here at 250. Just want to make sure, so I'm going to make a note here that 0.6 lactate at 200 watts was an error. Real data unknown. Can't determine LT1 accurately. Okay, just for next time. So we for sure have at least, what we do have for next lactate curve is we know up to 175 watts is good, and then we know from here up is good. So the only thing we know is this number could be really close to this one and then deflect up, or it could trend up in a nice curve. So we don't really know what it could be. Let's just change it to 2.3 to even. Let's just get it to, let's change it to 2.1. So we'll just make it so it's a nice smooth curve. It doesn't really matter, but okay, so we'll call it 2.1 up here as well, so I don't forget. All right, so like I said, we've got some good data here, and we've got good data from here up. So next time you do a test, we can at least see if this flattens longer here and what happens in this area. But so one error is not a total loss. However, it does oddly enough happen right when we in a spot where we would most likely need it. So what I would do next time is always take your lactate and stay on the wattage. So when you're taking that lactate at 200 watts, you might have had a 4-minute step built or something, but stay on 200 watts until you get the reading. Because then if you get an error, you can take another one. And you can just stay on 200 watts. And it's not going to really affect the overall outcome of the test in a negative way, but it will help us get a proper lactate point at 200 watts. So this is where I don't like to pre-build the workouts in erg mode. I would just, ride at 100 watts. When I'm ready to take my lactate, I take my lactate, get my numbers, make sure I don't have an error, and then manually raise the wattage up to 125. Start a lap time, boom, another 4 minutes, take a lactate, good one, awesome, increase to 150, and so on. But then if I'm just running it out of erg mode, I've got an erg mode, but I don't have a manually set 4 minutes in some software, then my lap can be as long as I need it until I raise the wattage with the software. So on 200 watts, you get an error. It's like, okay, fine, just stay there. Grab another strip. 20 seconds later, you got a reading. And in about 30 seconds, you can pull off a new reading and then move on to 225 watts. So just remember that for next time. Don't run like you're trying to strive for approximately a 4-minute step, but a little longer is okay, and getting that number is better. So we'll open the FaCt test. So the reason I had you redo this is because one of the things is we have this recovery line. Now the recovery line is the data that's collected when you're doing the second part of the test. So you do your step test here, boom, you get your max lactate here, max heart rate, and then you start doing the clearance or the combustion phase. This is where when you're riding at 130 watts, we get 4.8 and you had 120 watts. That's this green dot here, 61, 186, and so on. So that creates this, as I call it, a recovery line. Over time, this recovery line may or may not improve. By improve, I mean it may get closer to your original test, during the clearance phase. So if you get better at combusting lactate and the wattage goes up, then you have a better recovery. This can kind of help us just depending on your sport, what kind of recovery you might have. So can you do constant, really fast starts in a mountain bike race, or so that helps us define some parts of your fitness, and also looking at tests in the future, like, is this improving? Now, some people genetically just have a line like this and they can't make it better. That just then you have to race with your strengths and understand your weaknesses. So it'll mean more when we have another test to look at, but that's where the information comes from. The reason I knew the first test was funky is because it's impossible to have better. It's possible to have equal numbers right after, but even that is highly unlikely to have after a true maximal effort to be recovered right away. Sometimes we see the first one is quite off the line, and then we get closer second and third lactates. That's pretty normal. Very seldom are they ever on the line until after, maybe the third or fourth step. But we're talking 20 minutes of lactate clearance by then. So when I see your first test, the green line was better than the step test. So I just know that that's not possible. This looks like a much better test to me. Maybe next time, spend more time on 100 watts, like a good 15 minutes riding at 100 watts. It might help you calm down or whatever, and just really let things stabilize. But yeah, try a lot longer on 100 watts next time you do a test. That might help. So well done test. We can take our 250 watts from the lactate curve, and that's our upper linear limit here. So we got LT2 at 250. And I'd normally use LT1 to kind of help indicate what might be that sort of endurance zone split, but we're gonna have to guess a bit here. But most importantly, the balance point to me is always the best thing to track anyway, because there is a little bit of there's a little bit of science and a little bit of art and a little bit of a bunch of things to look at LT1 and LT2. So I think people have seen enough tests that it can be tricky sometimes to actually identify those points. And so when we look at, say, let me just quickly grab another test here to show you what I mean. So if we look at another lactate test here, this is a great example of well done test, good data, no errors, but it's just like a gentle curve all the way up. So then we get into this big discussion. Well, is it 2 and 4? Well, we can identify those points, but I think I'm not a big believer in that, just due to nutrition and a variety of reasons. So we don't really see any clear deflections here. Like if you're looking at angles, there's no big discrepancy in any of these pitch changes. So I'd be hard pressed to find LT2 here, which is what I said to Peter. I was like, yeah, I don't see an LT2 by definition. So that this is possible. And then when we look at them overlap, just once again, just quickly from somebody else, you can see, just the FaCt test, pardon me. You can see how there's a different, very different situation in the recovery. Maybe a little far off than you, but then a little closer a little later on. So this is, this is a very individual thing, but it can help us once we have a few tests. So let's get yours back open. Okay, I think I'm going to send these out to someone if you want, and maybe you can put some background music in here or something, make these really cool. Might even get you to talk for me. Anyway, so the balance point part, the nice thing is you're either clearing or you're producing. So there's the point is given to us. We don't have to decide where it is, and that's another thing I like about balance point. It's not going to lie to us where it is, and then we can relate what are those numbers to that balance point. So a couple things here. So balance point is 212. I see a lot of balance points, in the neighborhood of 210, 230 watts, 205 to 225 watts. So this is a very normal range for starting out. You know, MAP sitting up around, I think you did 1.5 minutes on 300 watts. So in the FaCt software, it gets recorded a little differently. But so you've got an MAP of 300 and a balance point of 212. So if we look at the percentage, we've got, 212 divided by 300. So that gives us a 70% ratio. So that's, you know, in the bottom end of the range that I like to see. So if we take a look at the top end of the range, it's going to be 75% of that 300. So we'll take 0.75 times 300 gives us 225. So personally, I'd say, you know, we really want to work on this aerobic system. I know I say that every single time or almost every time, but we want to work on this aerobic system and try to push this up to 75% at least. And, you know, at this time of the year, if you can push it to 230 or we can get a higher balance point, then we can go into some intensity and it'll probably be more sustainable. But we want to push this balance point at least to 75% of our MAP before we worry about raising our MAP. You know, with the 212, I think that this is a situation where you want to do a lot of just a lot of what I'd call steady endurance. So not really tempo intervals, just below balance point, more like warm up. A lot of what I just suggested for Colin in his post there. So with this balance point here, instead of doing like 210 watts or 215 watts and do, you know, 2x20 or 3x20 or 2x30, this is an opportunity where I would probably say, hey, let's just warm up for as little as you need to. Yeah, like the least amount of warm up you feel you need to be ready. So I generally would just do step tests. You know, you do maybe a 4 or 5 minute step test. 4 or 5 minute step test starting at 100. So that's 100, 125, 150, 175 watts. Maybe go up to 200 watts, gets us in the 20 to 25 minute warm-up range. Once you get to 200 watts, you're just gonna kind of stay riding right around 210. I'll put some little notes in the post as well, but I would try, you know, maybe 2 days a week where you don't worry about heart rate, but keep an eye on it and see how high it does go. And then another 2 days a week where you ride at 210 watts or 210 watts, 205 watts, but don't go over your balance point heart rate of 150. So I'd say a couple of days you're going to restrict yourself by heart rate, and a couple of days you're not going to. You're just going to ride by power. But pay attention to heart rate and see what's happening. Maybe count your respiration on those days. So not a total loss on the lactate test, just no real way to define LT1. LT2, we're looking at 250 watts, and the balance point test is really nicely done here. So we're looking at 150 beats and 212 watts, and I'll put a few notes up on the forum. Awesome job.